Hello and welcome to The Progress Theory, where we discuss scientific principles for optimizing human performance. I am Dr. Phil Price, and on today's episode, we are joined by ultrarunner and CEO of Beyond the Ultimate, Kris King. Now, ultramarathons are gaining in popularity. More and more people are looking to push their running performance further than they've ever done before. However, have you ever considered doing an ultramarathon in some of the harshest environments in the world? Well, that's exactly what Beyond the Ultimate offer, providing ultramarathons in such places like the jungle, the desert, and the mountains. And Kris King created these races. So in this episode, Kris and I are going to discuss exactly what you need to do to prepare for some of the harshest races in the world. As always, follow The Progress Theory on Instagram, YouTube, and check out all of our other episodes. Here is Kris King. Kris, thank you for coming on to The Progress Theory.
Thanks, Phil. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. I know we met and last saw each other at the Omnia retreat, which was a really good experience. And you gave a great talk during that time. So that's why you've been in my mind ever since then, because I wanted to elaborate on some of the things that we discussed there. And I think it'd be great to link in with, ultra-marathon performance, because you've got so much experience in that. So, looking forward to delving into some questions. Before we get going, do you want to just give a bit of an overview as to who you are and Beyond the Ultimate?
Yeah, okay. So my name's Kris King, and for the last 20 years, I've either been running, coaching people for, or designing some of the toughest ultra races in the world. So my company, Beyond the Ultimate, we do multi-day events. So people may have heard of the Marathon des Sables, which was probably like the first kind of big guts and glamour event in that field. We're like that, but we've kind of ratcheted up a bit, and all our races are environment-based. So we've got one in the cold, one in the hot, one in the really extreme mountains, and one in the jungle. And we really specialize in remote areas and hostile environments. So peak performance, really, in environments that are trying to not allow you to perform. And then we've also got the Spine race as well, which is a non-stop 268-mile race. It's self-supported, self-sufficient again, and even self-nav and all that kind of stuff. So if I haven't been running them myself, I've had a front row seat to watching people make the mistakes or succeed and all that kind of stuff. And it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah, this sounds awesome. Where did the idea for Beyond the Ultimate come from? Because obviously Marathon des Sables, very popular. And in my head, I'm thinking that a lot of people now are, yes, there's sport, but there's also that sort of different level above where sport becomes like a challenge that only a few people do. And I know that kind of draws a lot of people to it. And that sounds like what Beyond the Ultimate is trying to and achieves, because it's like, okay, you want to do something which not many people can do, and that is incredibly impressive. You're training for a challenge that is very unique. Is that kind of where the idea behind Beyond the Ultimate came from?
Yeah, I think so. It was a combination of me being super interested in sustainable travel. I don't know why. I mean, this was when I was around about the 18 to 21 age range. I was really interested in sustainable travel before everyone was talking about it. I felt like I did a couple of trips away and just really was interested in getting into remote areas and experiencing the people and the culture and doing it in a way that would benefit the people in that area. I really saw the impact of tourism on a local level and loved that. So my mind at the time was going, I might guide, I might be a safari guide, I might be doing something like that. But similarly, at the same time, I was getting this love for endurance sport and running. And, in the early 90s, the cool thing to do was a marathon. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, the cool thing to do was an Ironman. And, if you go to a marathon's a really good achievement, but if you go into an office space of 100 people now and say, hey, I did a marathon at the weekend, it's not like, whoa, that it was before. It was like, oh, cool, I know about 8 people back, or whatever. My Uncle Dave did one or...
Next one.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And like, well done, and even though you are in the real low percentages, in that world of people that you probably hang around with if you train a lot, it's not. It's not anymore, because people are just wanting that. So I suppose fortunately ahead of the curve on both angles. So we kind of got ahead of the market there, and then obviously ultra running endurance sport has blown up in the last couple of years. And I think it's partly to do with that. And I don't think it's any coincidence, and probably, a topic to go too deep too soon. But, when you look at the mental health crisis, I don't think that is a coincidence that you have more people on things like antidepressants, more people in therapy than ever before. And there's a rise in a sport that often has a link to people with trauma. So, I think that those two things combined have been the growth of that. And we've kind of been the pinnacle event for most people. It's the one thing that they might train for in their life that they think that's the top end of what we might be able to do.
So what are the environments that you race under? So I know when we spoke, you were talking about desert, and you've been in Kyrgyzstan, am I right, regarding a mountainous race?
So mountain, so that's high altitude. So every race has got some element that you would have to ideally prepare for in a probably in a country that you can't prepare for. So, the desert and the heat of plus 50s of what it was this year in Namibia, you can nothing will prepare you for plus 50 and trying to perform at that, but you can replicate like sauna sessions and stuff. But the tougher ones really are the altitude. There's no way to replicate altitude until you get there. So it normally takes an acclimatization phase. Or the jungle, which is humid and hot and wet and slippy and all these kind of things. And that's really hard to kind of prepare. And at altitude, actually, to begin with. So that's got everything. And then obviously we have our ice race in northern Sweden, which gets quite easily down to minus 40. And, preparing for that is tough. But that's the exciting thing. Most people on the start line have never been to those extremes. So they're experiencing many things. They're all athletes, but they're not by any stretch used to that environment. And that's the whole part of the challenge.
Which one do most people struggle with? I mean, they all sound like a struggle, but is there a particular environment that people seem to underestimate more?
I think when you look at the toughest environments, that I think if you were to just, every year, this will always churn someone up. I think the jungle is one of them. It's very unforgiving. It's just a lot of things go on in the jungle from even like a micro level, like, you're more likely to get ill because of the climate is so suitable for, infections to move. So if you've got someone that's got a sickness bug or something like that, it spreads. But then you've also got just that insane humidity that doesn't drop throughout the entire day. In a desert, it gets hot in the day and cool in the evening. In the mountains, you can get high and then you can get low. But in the jungle, you're kind of in it. You're kind of just sat in this thing. And if it decides to be humid, it's humid. But actually, as extreme as the minus 40s, minus 50s are, you can carry kit for that. And it's not as bad as people think, once you get moving. Some of the worst environments, I think, we can experience in this country, some of the most extreme ones. So like when you look at our spine race, January, Pennines, you throw sleep deprivation into wet, saturated rain, heavy winds. It might only be like minus 2, minus 5, but that kind of wet cold is super extreme and exposes people to hypothermia. It's such a quick time frame that actually, those two polar opposites, that kind of wet cold and then that wet humid, are the ones that kind of throw people off, because it's really hard to regulate your temperature at the bottom end of that. And it's also really hard to regulate your kind of sweat levels and your kind of stuff at the top end. So yeah, I think as soon as you start adding moisture into the air, it kind of screws people up.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've always thought, because we had Lindsay Bruce on the Progress Theory not too long ago, and he talked about the jungle phase of SAS selection, and I always thought that must be the hardest. It looks unrelenting. And especially what you were saying about, you're kind of stuck in that environment. Sometimes there's some changes to the environment which you can kind of use as a bit of not a cool down period, but a period of easing, but you just don't get that in the jungle.
Exactly. And then, you're throwing sleep deprivation in there on our race, particularly sleeping in hammocks. And I think when you're looking at multi-day races like ours, if you're a top end athlete, the guy or the girl that's winning this race, your race and your experience, your race might look like a nice increment going up of performance, of like you're starting low and you're starting to find it harder as you go and stuff like that. But most 99.9% of people are like this. They have good moments and low moments. And in the low moments on these races, in the extremes, you haven't got long to mess around. If you get really cold in the ice race at minus 40, you haven't got long to warm up before your race is over. If you get really hot in the desert, you haven't got long before you need to cool cool your core temperature down and lower it when you're done. But in the jungle, not only is that time short, but it's really hard to get that back up again, because once you hit that low, you're recovering in a place which you can't really get refuge from. So that's the only reason that I say like the jungle in that sense is tough. But they all have their own challenges. You look at the desert race and trying to perform in mine in plus 50, and it's a runnable race. So people are racing. In the others, it's more about survival, try and get to the finish. But in the desert, they're racing. So they're trying to perform and run at the top end of their thing in a plus 50 heat box. That becomes an interesting dynamic as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's such different ways of tackling it. If you are doing a race to complete versus doing a race to get the quickest time possible, the preparation for both are very, very different, aren't they? And I guess that takes into account the actual physical training, the equipment, all of those types of things. Because I guess from an equipment point of view, if you're trying to run for performance, you're going to take limited equipment, or the equipment that you take is literally the minimum amount that you need. I mean, I even heard of people in Marathon Dressage were cutting their toothbrush in half. So they've literally got the end with the brush just to try and save a bit of weight and space. So that's
exactly
a real
that.
small thing.
Exactly that. And it's all those micro details. It's those micro details that can make or break a race. And especially, there's only 2 people that have ever completed our entire series. And there's no one that's done it in a calendar 12 months. Everyone that's tried to do it in under 12 months has failed.
Wow.
But there's 2 people that have completed our whole series. There's a chap called Russell Jackson, who is a really solid athlete. He's not won any races, but he would finish top 10 in all of them. Solid guy. And then Christina Madsen, who's a race winner. And so as a woman, she had to have the attitude of, if I want to race against these guys, I need to look at my pack and really be as minimal as possible, because every microgram matters, because she's a very strong woman. She boxes, she CrossFits and all that kind of stuff. But she recognized that actually the weight carrying ratio to her body weight is going to be larger, so she might weigh like 60 kilo, I think, and her pack weight needs to be below 10, where she's racing against 75, 80 kilo guys that are carrying the same weight. It kind of works from balance. Their entire rig, their entire setup is bigger, but that carrying ratio is much larger for her. So she had to have a very minimalist approach. So she was really, really, really counting calories. She weighed everything. She had and this is the common thing across all. They have spreadsheets where you measure out everything. You have to really decide what you're going to take. And this kind of race strategy is different, because it can make a difference. It really can, when you're racing over 8, 10, potentially 12-hour days.
But that also sounds really exciting, because people like to really plan their training, because it shows an element of control leading up to what they perceive to be achieving peak performance. But we're doing the same with the equipment. The whole experience or process leading to an event sounds just really, really exciting, and something which must draw that type of personality, I guess. Yeah,
we get a lot of successful business people do our races, because I think it gives them that same kind of founder, that exciting bit of research, that exciting thing to kind of obsess over and stuff like that. So we get a lot, and weirdly enough, the people that do well on the races like the spine race, where the sleep deprivation kicks in and where the micro detail really matters on navigations, there seems to be a weird percentage of scientists that do it. Look at John Kelly and all that. They all have a science background, so they have a very practical application to their training, a very practical application to their race strategy. It's very methodological, and it just seems to be a passover trait from their job. It just seems to work well for them. But yeah, it's fascinating for me. I mean, you could probably say I love watching it. I love watching races unfold. I love the dynamic of. It's a very friendly sport, so people will be friendly with each other. They're not salty with each other in camp. They are talking, but then when the race starts, it's on. You're looking at people, and you're looking at these athletes like really, really taking it seriously, and it's been years of prep and commitment and sacrifice to get there. And it's not a big televised sport. It doesn't go on telly. It doesn't go like it's the pocket and the purse isn't massive for races and winning. So it's a sport for the love of it, and it's a fantastic thing to watch day in, day out. It
sounds like it's the type of sport that would be perfect for like a Netflix series because it's so long. You're not going to, the race is on later, I'm going to go check it out because it's so long. You just tune in and out for certain bits, whereas a Netflix series will probably film all those key bits and see the changes in the athletes as they go through the event, happy at the beginning, excited versus, experiencing those lows and highs and kind of tell a story. And I know I watched it's the adventure race, the one in Fiji that had Bear Grylls in it.
Oh, yeah.
But it sounds like that would be perfect. Have the Beyond the Ultimate Netflix series where you see you'll have with three people that have to do all 4 races in the calendar month and see what happens to them. That would be cool.
We end up talking to Netflix and Disney and all that kind of stuff all the time. But the problem you've got is the application of filming it. It's just so hard to film in these places and get regular coverage and stuff like that. But yeah, it'll happen as things move on. And it would be fascinating to just bring that to a wider audience because I think people will. There are some really good documentaries out on YouTube now. I think if anyone's this isn't of my races, but if anyone's new into this world and wants to watch just a fascinating look into that kind of world, there's a race called the Barkley Marathon that people may have heard of, and it's a very unique, very kind of obscure race. And there's a documentary called The Race That Eats Its Young.
Okay, not seen that one.
That's a really good. Yeah, so that's a really good film to watch, which kind of gives you the insight into these people. And John Kelly, who I mentioned, who's the person that does really well and has a very really structured approach, and he's in that. You get to see him in that. So that's a race that really pushes people to the end of maximum human performance. I think only 3 or 4 people have ever done it here in history. So it's a fascinating play.
The Barkley Marathon, it was quite a while ago since I've seen that. So I think a few people have completed it since then. They should do another update one because, when you've got something that difficult and really challenges people, you've got plenty more stories since the last time they filmed. So maybe they should think of doing that again. Yeah,
well, that's the thing. That's the beauty of that. Laz is a wonderful mind who has that race, and he's a purist. So he doesn't like to let film crews in. He doesn't like, and I don't want to say too much, but you'll understand why there's no global. It's amazing how it's become that big, considering Laz has tried to make it a cult thing that's not big. And it's just this weird, wonderful, wacky thing that I think highlights the mindset of the people that perform at the top end of the sport.
Which races from Beyond the Ultimate have you done?
So I've designed them all, essentially. I've ran the desert race when we were training another RD up. I ran that. And then obviously in the jungle I've been out there, but I was as designing it, I didn't run it as a race, if you know what I mean. I ended up doing it over 8 or 9 days. We did more mileage over different bits and stuff. So it was a different thing. But I've done a lot of my own stuff. So I kind of got into this. I ran from John O'Groats to Land's End, self-supported with a mate of mine, Adam Kimball. We did all the 3 peaks at the same time. I did that in a month. We could have done it a lot quicker. We were averaging about, I think the minimum we did was 30 miles a day. And then towards the end, we was getting up to 70, 80 mile days. Just because we were zigzagging across the country. My mate Kimball from America wanted to see the country, and we were just, all right, let's do a joggle. All right, let's do the 3 peaks. All right, let's go see our mate Steve, who you did the race with. And, and so we ended up doing this really, we call it the Great British Adventure, and we just kind of zigzagged our way down the country with a backpack, running stupid amount of miles a day. So, that kind of self-sufficient getting a backpack on and going is what I've always loved. And then, ran and cycled around the coastline of Britain back in 2012, I think it was. That was a good little adventure. And then, I suppose when I was trying to test my top-end performance, I was going for a speed record of Mount Killy. And I ran that in about 9 hour 40-something, I think, from bottom to top, which was slow for me. I was aiming for a sub 7:15, but got caught in a whiteout. But so that was my kind of break into these. I was already in that world before designing these things as an athlete. But I tended to do my own stuff because I just had a project and ran with it.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of it. You can kind of create your own goals, can't you? And just tailor things to whatever you want to particularly achieve. But all of them sound wicked, especially the Kilimanjaro one.
Yeah, well, you know what? That was a different thing for me. It was... I'm not really a racer that compete I am a very competitive person, but I'm not motivated to train for these things to be competitive. I train for these things because I think it's awesome adventure. I want to be fit and stuff like that. But I have been competitive. And the Killy thing brought that competitive edge out of me of like, how quick and how efficient can I get at running quickly uphill? And it was all about, body weight ratio to that. I was in the labs with Sheffield Hallam with Dr. Alan Ruddock, and we were doing VO2 max testing, gas analyzer testing. So I was bringing science into my training, learning all about that, and trying to get those extra percentiles out of my performance. And I was a very specifically adapted athlete at that time. I could run up most near vertical hills at a frightening pace, but wasn't really. I'd lost all my kind of strength. I'd not really, even though I was weight training. Just the amount of miles I was doing a week and the kind of importance of keeping my body weight at a certain point to perform. But yeah, that whole Kilimanjaro thing brought out a whole different type of athlete in me, which was quite interesting as a journey to go on to become quick, and get really, really, world-class quick at running up a hill. So, yeah.
Did you have to acclimatise beforehand? So did you scale up to... So my wife and I did Kilimanjaro for our honeymoon. So I kind of roughly know key parts and the trail. I'm just trying to think of where was... Because the initial summit day is it's like 1,200 meters. So the last camp before the summit is quite low in comparison to, I guess, other 5,000-6,000 meter mountains. And I just remember that particular summit day, quite a few of our group struggled with the altitude. So how many days did you spend acclimatizing beforehand before you went back to the bottom and then did the race?
I did a training camp prior. So I went to Chamonix, which is ground level 800 meters. You can get up to about 2-1. And I was doing, I did about 2 weeks in Chamonix where I was running at least 15 to 2,000 meters of climb a day. So, you was looking at a 15,000 meter week of total vert that I was running. And what I would do is I'd get up to about 2,200 meters, as high as I can get, and take a blood sat reader and just note it down, sit there for a few hours, come back down, and organically with these trails, sometimes you're up and below that. But I wanted to be at 100% at 2,100 at least before I turned up at Killy. And that whole training camp was more about just long uphill sessions. I'd kind of run out of hill in the Peak Districts and Pennines of long continuous stuff. And in Chamonix, you've got these good 1,000, 2,000 meter climbs which are runnable. So then after Chamonix, I went to Killy. I had 2 days down just to recover from the flight. And then I did a 5-day rotation. So we did an up and down each day. So went from 1,500, I can't remember the exact split, but 1,500 to 3,000, slept for a little while in the afternoon, came back down, camped at 1,800, went to 3,100. So obviously when you do Killy, you normally just limp up, don't you, in little bits and stuff like that. I was doing almost like Everest style rotations, up, down, up, down, up, down, until we got to, I didn't actually summit in my acclimatization. I wanted to save the summit to the attempt. So I kind of went as close as I dared up to the glacier and then came back down. And then, camped up at about, camped down at the bottom at about midnight, set off. So I got to experience, I ran most of it in the dark, it was in the cool, it was in the, and I summited as the sun was kind of coming. It was a beautiful thing. I was just a bit pissed off because I got caught in the kind of bad way. What I learned from there is I should have given myself a couple of days of attempts to pick the best weather day. If I waited another 24-hour period, I've had this clear day of weather. But foolishly, I left a summit day to this day, lined up all the PR, all the stuff and the tracking back home for this day, thinking that Kilimanjaro's weather's quite stable, and it just happened to be an absolutely awful day to try and summit. So, yeah.
Sounds like
lesson learned.
You're very prepared for all of your challenges. It isn't just okay, here's a challenge that I would like to do. It's slightly different. I'm going to train as I would a normal ultra to do it. You kind of do that, but also at least try and expose yourself to similar environments that you're going to experience in the actual event. Like you said about seeking out inclines that were long enough to be able to I guess, condition your body for constant uphill running? Because that must be a real, people think about the physiological system, but you've got to think about your ankles and your ability to be able to, just bounce your way up at such dorsiflex angles, with your Achilles, the gastroc, completely lengthened. It's a very specific strength that's needed there, and you sort out how to train for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you can't write off the impact of lots of descent work. So when you're trying to put a lot of incline into your training, you also add a lot of decline impact. So what would happen typically is I'd be running up the hills and walking the downs just to make sure that I'm saving my efforts for the things that matter. And when you're doing that in, hills, you can search out decent hills in the UK. In the Peak and Pennines, I had loads of them, 20 percentiles and stuff like that, but they just weren't long enough for me to work on continuous pacing. What is it going to be like when I have 3 hours of just constant up? I can't experience that in this country, so I had to move to it. And I think physiologically, I felt really confident. Like I thought that, I know that I was actually worried about things like, calves getting to the point where you run uphill for that long, they just pump. It's just like doing like bicep curls for hours and hours and hours. Imagine what I was going to do to your bicep. Your calves get to that point. And I can remember there's a fixed period in training which I had to overcome that and kind of like work on taking my overload a little slower. But the main thing for me was it was more psychological. This was a big scary thing. I was going up at altitude in a very quick way. Pulmonary edema, cerebral edema is a very life-threatening, and I just wanted to make sure that psychologically I was in a good place where I knew that I could ascend that quickly and be okay. Because what you're doing then, if you're at a base altitude and ascending to 5,000, I think it's 600, isn't it, Killy? In a very quick, you're basically asking for a pulmonary edema. You're basically asking for a cerebral edema. People have got them at much less kind of. So I needed to make sure that I was at least acclimatized to like 4,000, 4,500. So the stress and strain of going over that extra 1,000 meters was not going to give me any particular problems. And that I was also fit enough to descend quickly if something went wrong. And descending quickly under fatigue as well. Descending technical when you're absolutely, you've been running uphill at a solid pace for 8, 9 hours. So yeah, there was a lot to that. And I loved that kind of finding out about it. No one had really done it before, apart from a couple of like Killian Jornet, who's obviously one of the best, he is the best ultra runner in the world and stuff. So, and he didn't really put his training notes down. So, it was just one of those things where it was just really fascinating for me as a coach and an athlete to kind of sit and go, right, how can I adapt my body in the best way for this? So, yeah.
You mentioned how
good learning.
It's great to watch all of the athletes perform the races for Beyond the Ultimate. What qualities, and this could be both physical or mental, but what qualities do you think separates those that do very well, either that they're winning the event or they're consistent top 10, for example? But what qualities do you think those athletes have versus those that quite often don't quite make it?
In our race in particular, there's a different thing. So if you've got a 100-mile race back here, for example, in the UK in temperate weather, I'd say it's those that are willing and more experienced at being in that kind of level of discomfort. No matter how prepared you are to run 100 milers. So Adam Kimball, a good mate of mine, he's probably one of the best 100-mile racers in the world. Like, he loves that distance and he'll cruise for 60, 70 miles and then enter this kind of like final 30, which is mad to say out loud, isn't it? But this is a guy that can 6-minute mile comfortably for 70 miles and then the race is on. And he has races, of course, where he feels like shitty at 30 and 40 and stuff, and it's just how it goes. But he is one of those guys that can kind of get into a pain cave and just, he has such a positive attitude that he can kind of bring himself through it. In our environments, if you come in with that attitude, you're probably going to get wiped out quite quickly because you have to have an ultimate respect for the environment that you're racing in. So it's slightly different. If you're in a temperate environment, the best ultra runners are the ones that can kind of go into that pain cave and hold it. The ones on our races in particular, the ones that recognize that when they're there, they need to adjust their strategy to what they normally do and respect where they are. And because it's a 5-day race, it's having the confidence to know that you're going to get better. You're if someone is an hour ahead of you, it's fine. There's still 4 days to go and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one of the best parts of the job really, is watching those people get completely broken down and built back up. So the people that are looking at not competing but completing are the ones that really go through the ringer. They're probably out in the environment for longer. It's the biggest thing they'll ever do. And watching them kind of hit these massive lows, because then when they get to the finish line, it's the biggest high ever, and you've been involved in that remarkable journey for them. But when you've got the competitive side of it, you have to have an absolute faith and confidence in yourself and your abilities. And that comes from all of this preparation time and taking it seriously. And I think there's a lot of similarity between me and a couple of the people that have won our races. Is actually you fear a loss of a performance over the effort level that you put in to get there. Ultra running is time consuming. It's a time consuming sport. Your winners of these races are dedicating 10 to 16 hour weeks of training. You've got hour 2 a day of either running or that kind of stuff, your nutrition on top. So you're looking at 10 to 16 hours of dedicated training time per week, probably plus research, and you're just terrified that when you come to the performance, all of that may be wasted. So you're dead determined on making sure that your performance and you get that, finish and get there and stuff. And so there's it's the ability to be able to deal with that pressure as well. Because chances are, if you're at 16-hour training weeks, if you're a family person, you've probably put some strain on your family life. You've probably said no to a lot of friends' parties. You've probably not gone on that stag do. You've probably not gone to that wedding and gone full send. You've not gone to that kids' party and had the party rings. All those kind of little micro decisions is what you've done for like the last year, and you've been a really boring friend to those that don't run. And then you're just at that day, and it's the people that can control that stress and anxiety and rein it in and be like, no, this is it. I'm confident. I'm going to go, and have the right level of confidence to not become too arrogant and succumb to the environment.
And I guess you were saying how it's like that fear of that you've missed something. You've gone and spent hours of preparation, but the fear of not being fully prepared means you have a bigger respect to the challenge ahead. Would you say that's kind of...
Yeah, and there's no perfect way to prepare for these things. So there's an acceptance actually that you're on a start line in an environment that you can't fully prepare for. So everyone's the same. You just got to be better than the next person.
And the fact that having a respect for the fact you can't fully prepare, but I'm going to be prepared as much as possible, whereas you might have the next person say, well, I don't really know what's going to happen. I have a rough idea, and that might make their preparation slightly complacent, and then all of a sudden either they're not physically ready, or equipment or their tactics are not quite there, and that leads to poorer performance, especially once they get into the middle, or when they get to the harder parts, those troughs of performance that they're going to go through during the event.
Yeah, and that's it. Ultra running essentially is an energy and is a balancing of energy in the mind. And the ones that are at the top end know what they're experiencing more because they've been through it. So why am I feeling the way I'm doing 9 times? Well, I would guarantee that actually there's a process that you would go through, or I would go, why do I feel rubbish? Is it my hydration is the first question? Is it my food? Is it my salt? Is it my sleep? They're the kind of 4 things that you kind of go in order, and chances are, fifth, is it my pace? Depending on the rate, there might be a slight change, but those 5 things are the questions you're going to ask yourself if you're starting to feel a bit shitty. And I can guarantee it's probably in that, like hydration, food, pacing, sleep, that kind of stuff. And if you can work through that and fix them, then you're fine. But the ones that haven't experienced that before, you can sometimes muddle around and just not fix it, and then it gets too late. You get to this point where you can't sort your hydration, you can't sort your food, and you just hit this.
You can't recover.
Hit this wall. And no matter how strong you are mentally, you're done. You're done. So your mental capacity will get you to a certain point, but then your body will just shut down. And that happens when people don't look after their admin.
How would you physically prepare for one of your races, especially a 250 miler? And I'm thinking more physically, because we've talked about, I guess, equipment and also going to try and find some environment that is relatively similar to what you would be experiencing to help with developing those qualities. But say that you only have the ability to train in the UK, and you mentioned like 10 to 16 hours seems to be a common number of hours per week. What would you feel?
That's for winners.
For winners,
yeah.
okay.
That's for race winners. Yeah. So for people that do most of these things, I could confidently say that if you're training smart, you'd only need 6 hours a week.
Okay.
You'd build to that. So if you've not done ultra running or you're new to ultra running, you would build to 6 hours. I think a word that's not used enough in ultra endurance training is prerequisite. You've got to have that you've got to earn the right to do 6 hours a week, So, and the reason why I use time as a variable is because mileage can vary massively on terrain. It can, Eliud Kipchoge's 100-mile weeks is going to be very different to a 100-mile week that you might run or I might run. So, you would start off with a, 3-hour week, make the session time, you might look at some kind of frequency. You might say, I'm going to run every day this week, little and often, or I might do 3 1-hour runs, or I might do, it depends on your schedule. And actually the beautiful thing at the beginning is that you can fit around your freedom. You're not going to get it wrong. But what I always say to people is if you can get to 6 hours a week of running comfortably, i.e. you haven't got any niggles, you're cruising at a low heart rate and you're finding it comfortable, possibly a tad boring now, like you're at 6-hour weeks and you're kind of going, yeah, I can run. It's part of my life. It's part of my schedule. You're in a very good position. You've set a very good foundation for adding the things in, like we discussed, like getting ready for the event in particular. I wouldn't add those things into the last phase of the training. You don't want to be adding backpacks in. You don't want to be going out looking for, sitting in a freezer a year out from the event. Unless it's a particular concern of yours, if you were training for the ice in that example. So you would just look at getting the basics right, getting the consistency in, getting all of the things that any athlete needs: good nutrition, good sleep, good support network. And then once you get to that 6-hour week, which I think is like I use a 6-hour week like a 10,000 steps marker. It's not the exact science behind it, but actually around about that time is a good marker. And then, dependent on what you want to do and where you want to travel and how well you want to do on the event, you might take that up. But there is often a decent correlation between time spent in a lower heart rate per week and performance, if you can take it there slowly and in the right way.
Though, say you've worked your way up to 6 hours, by that point, would you then start to incorporate some of those hours dedicated to more high-speed running? And then the rest is kind of like that low, easy pace, just to mix it up? Or because of the type of event it is, do you encourage people to, don't worry, just find an easy pace, spend time on feet, and enjoy that low intensity, sort of lower heart rate, just getting used to it. And that will hopefully over time provide further prerequisites for the specific stuff you do later on.
I think with, even in that first initial phase, introducing sprint work and kind of interval training is key. Even if it's just a 1 session a week or a quick session, a couple of sprints, just to kind of prep the body for that. One thing that I think all ultra runners should be is adaptable. And when you look at the best ultra runners, Kylian Jornet is basically a walking set of lungs and a heart on legs. He's completely adapted to it, but he can, at demand, hammer it up a hill in 2-3 minute intervals and recover really quickly. And he does that because he sometimes just races. He races hard and races often, and he's been fortunate enough to have a long career at it. So, the Kenyans, for example, will do hard brick sessions. They don't really do the interval stuff, but they do, the at race pace because they're training for being quick marathoners, so they need to. So I would do that. But then as you start to get to 6 hours, I would be chucking more of them in. I would be doing at least 1, possibly 2 a week. And actually, as your mileage starts to go up and your time starts to go up, I actually started to transition off of sprints into gym equipment onto a rower or a bike, just to make sure that I was lowering the impact where possible and just reducing that risk of injury. So I would, when I was at that 6-hour level, let's call it like phase 1 is getting to 6 hours. Phase 2 is now developing on and becoming a better athlete. That's when I'd transition to a watt bike or a rower, and just do, your 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off for 6 times 2, and really, really focusing on max effort. Turning up with the intent to be proper max effort, not to fuck about. You're there to create an adaptation and to go hard. So you've got it right when you turn up to the gym that day and you're kind of dreading it. and I always used to try and get someone to be with me on that. You'll always kind of push out that extra percent if someone is in your ear or, down here, I'm quite fortunate in Poole to have a lot of rowers in the area. So, getting on a rower next to a rower that's setting the pace for you is brutal, So, so I would definitely do that in phase 2. And then, you'll kind of find phase 3 as you're getting close to the event is you're bringing in specifics like your backpack if it's our race, or your environment, or your terrain, or your distance, or time on feet. A lot of our races are actually, there's a fair bit of walking because the terrain's not runnable. So spending longer out in the hills and stuff like that will be more beneficial to the event prep.
What's your next personal challenge? Because I remember when we were chatting last time, you had a few events planned. What's next for Kris?
So I'm going to attempt to be the fastest to run the Southwest Coast Path, which is a 638-mile trail down on the South Coast. I'm nowhere. I feel a bit like a fraud even saying it because I'm nowhere near that fit yet. I am 10K fit at the minute. I've had a pretty busy year at work. I've had a long period of time off as I've become a dad. So I'm slowly kind of bringing myself back into that 6-hour week and bringing some consistency into my training. And then I'll probably have a good 12 months of just solid. And the thing I'm going to enjoy about this one is it combines that kind of killy training and that hill. The Southwest Coast Path is insanely hilly. I will need to do 60 miles a day of 3,000 meters of climb every day for 10 days minimum to have a chance of the record. So I'm going to have both. I'm going to have to be amazingly good at uphill and downhill and distance and performing without sleep and so I'm looking forward to diving into that. I just haven't had the time or headspace with work and young toddler to get there and give it the full throttle. But the research has started. There's printouts on my desk of sections and inclines and declines, and all the kind of obsession is starting. And then I just need to put the time in to kind of get in to learn the route and the hard graft, the mileage. Which I'm not too worried about. That will come coming year.
What do you expect to be the hardest part of that particular challenge? The sleep deprivation or literally the undulation of the coast?
The final 48 hours. So a lot of people have tried to break this record and failed because they've gone with that attitude of I need to do 60 miles a day. I'm going to kind of flip it and say I'm going to run for 16. I'm going to move for 16 hours a day. So 16 hours is focused to getting along that trail, whether it be run, walk. I might stop to eat for a little while, but there's 16 hours of focus and then there's 6 hours or so of recovery, or 8 hours, get my maths right. So that's what I'm going to do. But as we get closer to the end of that, I suspect as body breaks down, I'm going to lose that 16 hours. It's going to turn into a 48-hour slogfest with no sleep. And I think that's all you're doing on a record that long is playing it safe until you can be in the game, until you, and then the thing is as well, there's people out there, there's people like Damien Hall, there's runners out there that are better runners than me that could run a different way. But for me, I've got to stay in the game and then go to war for 48 hours to break it. And Christian Morgan, that's got the record at the minute, is a fantastic runner. So, it's not a record that's going to go lightly. So I need to spend 8 days kind of just staying with him, being kind of there, and then having a mindset switch for the last 48 hours to try and, this is where I chip away at it and go and so I'm kind of dreading that because I know what that's going to feel like. That lack of sleep and constant moving on a broken body is going to be pretty brutal. And that was the thing that Damien Hall, who set the record initially, he wasn't the runner he is now, but he said that was the worst thing about it, was the 10 days of just lack of sleep and no recovery and relentless hill.
What makes you think that you're the type of runner that kind of just needs to stay in the game and then a big final push versus another runner that just has an ability to, I'm going to hit this type of output on these days, and if I plan it correctly, I should be able to maintain that through the whole race? Because I think both are valid strategies, but how do you determine who does what? Because I'd feel like I'm more like you. I would probably, maybe it's just because I'm heavier or a weaker runner, but I would need to think about just staying in the game because you can't complete it if you're injured, and then doing the last bit. What do you think?
I think if I'd been consistent through the years of my training, if I'd not had this gap of time out, I'd probably be a bit of a different attitude because I'd be a different athlete. I've not competed in a while. I've not raced in a while. I will be coming to a certain type of fitness because I'll be training specifically for that event, rather than being a quick ultra runner that's adapting to it. So if I think of people that have won our race, so a chap called John Shield, if John Shield ran it, John's a much better racer runner than me. He'd be able to, knock that out. And his problem would be, staying injury free because he has large mileage weeks and all that kind of stuff, and his performance is at the peak. Where I know I'm going to be slower. I know I'm going to walk sections that I probably can run. I know that I'm going to be a bit slower in the first few days. But I also know from these kind of things is you can adapt into it. By the first week of the Great British Adventure, running 30, 40 mile days, I was in pieces. By week 2 and 3, my body had just adjusted. And actually, doing 60, 70 mile days wasn't bad. It was just a thing, and it seems crazy, but your body kind of, so I will be approaching this where I'll be really trained, but actually I'll do a heavy phase probably about a month out, and then I'll do very little. So I'll feel undertrained, I'll feel under-prepped for it, but I just want an absolute recovery before that. And I think that's probably a mistake that a lot of people will make as well, is coming into that thinking, I'll do that, I'll have my taper a week before. And then they're coming into that without realizing, they're exhausted. They're not fully recovered, where my taper is probably going to be 3 weeks of complete rest, probably some walking. And then I'll feel underprepared and scared. And then as soon as I get moving, I'll figure it out.
I guess if you turn up to an event really tired, even with the taper wasn't really a taper because the taper didn't do its job.
No, and it's hard to taper when you're running 100-mile weeks or 10 to 14-hour weeks. It's really hard to taper. It's really hard to taper effectively because I don't think there's an exact science on it yet. I always say to people, just 20% your peak week, and just look at that as just take 20% of your peak week, keep moving, keep running. Because sometimes you can take, and I don't know what the science is behind it, but I've experienced it myself. You take a complete rest, and sometimes you just don't. When you're trying to race, then going straight to it, you just cannot get your body moving. It doesn't feel like it's in sync. Where if you've got that 20% of your volume done in a taper week, you're still running at least. You're still kind of moving it through the gears. Kind of taking a complete rest in a taper and kind of going into a top end performance is tough in this world. Like I just don't. I think personally, I would rather risk the kind of niggles and injuries. If I was racing in 100 miles or 60 miles, this is different. But yeah, it's a tough thing, and I don't think anyone. The taper suits the athlete, I think. I don't think there's any kind of standardized way to taper for endurance sport.
I mean, I guess ultimately, all you need to do, say if you've got 3 weeks, you need to do a certain amount of movement, let's call it movement volume, that's going to maintain the aerobic fitness that you gained through your peak block, but also is considerably low enough that the body just recovers in different ways. Yeah, because all you need to do is maintain what you got. You're not trying to add on fitness during that last bit. And people probably don't realise you probably don't need as much to maintain. You need considerably more to gain, but not as much to maintain. And you probably need a bit longer to try and fully recover. So
yeah, exactly. And you're as fit as you're going to be 3 weeks out. You're not going to get much more on that. So it's just that realisation that you've kind of done the work. But yeah, people get tetchy, people get itchy, and either push too hard or they get too scared and don't do enough. So yeah, it's tough. And I don't think I've ever, if I'm honest, got a taper completely right. I've never been at a start line of anything and gone, I feel
great
100%. Yeah. And it's probably because I'm about to do something that hurts.
Yeah. It's that little anxiety that you have that just makes your body feel a little bit painful in preparation.
Yeah, I think so. I can remember a 60-mile race that I did in particular, and the start line was really stacked. There was a lot of people there that I knew. I'd raced them before, they'd beat me before, and I'd trained really hard for a podium, and I really, really wanted it. And I knew that to get one, these guys I just knew it was going to really hurt, and I was really fit at the time, so confident, and yeah, lo and behold, it was probably one of the most painful races I've done, because from about 40 miles, normally at a 60-mile race, you kind of know your winners around about the 40, 50-mile mark. They're kind of making their move, and this one started at about 20. So about 20 miles in, some idiot went, and we all had to go with him. And it became a very horrible experience. Yeah, I finished fourth in the end as well, which was gutting. Yeah, I got chicked by my own physio. She did me in the final 2 miles, which if anyone was going to pump me down to fourth, I'm glad it was her. But yeah, it was brutal to get that far, and I was about 2K away from a third positioning and lost it to Sally.
That's it.
She was a GB runner at the time, so I'll take it.
Of course. Well, Kris, that was amazing. What recommendations would you have for anyone looking to sign up to one of the races for Beyond the Ultimate?
I think it depends where. I would say in our race in particular, if you're not an ultra runner, there's races like our jungle race and stuff, which people come from multi-disciplines. It's not an ultra running race, actually. There's people that have won that race that have come from OCRs and CrossFit and all that kind of stuff. I think it's one of those things where you can kind of look at the pinnacle and work backwards. So if you think like this is probably going to be like something that interests you or something that you like the look of and think, well, that's beyond my reach now, you can look at it as a 2-year journey and say, right, well, that's what I'm going to work towards. What do I need to do to get there? Our qualifying criteria is that you've run a marathon at least 12 months before the event.
Okay. Knowing
that ultra runners do well, sometimes non-ultra runners do well, but if you've got the time and you want this kind of projection, just that ultra running now, there are tons of events, tons of really, really good events ranging from 50K right through to a 150K single day events and multi-days and all that. When I started this thing, there was probably about 50 races in the UK. I think it's close to 600 now. Plus more, I've lost count. So there is probably, wherever you live in the UK or wherever you live in Europe, America, whatever, there will be an ultra race near you. Quick Google, step into the world. Step into the world of ultra running and just see if you like it. And we'll be waiting to see if it's a progressive journey for you.
Yeah, brilliant. It almost feels like you're the one where, like, try an ultra, then you can join the big leagues where you can get involved with all sorts of environmental fun.
Yeah, we'll see you. We'll see you someday soon.
How can I find more about Beyond the Ultimate on the socials?
So we've got Beyond the Ultimate's on every social or beyondtheultimate.co.uk. If anyone's interested, if you go to the update section on Beyond the Ultimate, I've just released an article a couple of weeks ago, and the second one's following the kind of topics on this. You can find me in amongst all that as well. I'm Kris Kingy on Instagram and stuff. And if you've got any questions, you can fire them through.
Brilliant. And I definitely recommend anyone that's listening to check them out. Even if you're not thinking about an ultramarathon at the moment, definitely have it on your radar, because the more and more people try new sports and challenges, these are the sort of pinnacle of something, that really pushes the boundary of human performance. So definitely check it out. But Kris, thank you so much for coming onto the program.
Thanks,
that was great.